Hello, everyone. We're going to be talking now about lighting for documentary, and primarily I'm talking about lighting for interviews in documentary, since that's kind of one of the main areas where you have a fair amount of control over the lighting. And sit down interviews are really the bread and butter of a lot of documentary films. Not all, certainly there's some that doesn't apply, but a lot of documentaries feature people sitting in chairs and talking to the camera, and getting the lighting for that is getting it as good as you can get it is important. It's not the end of the world as long as it's, watchable and sounds good. That's more important than having perfect lighting. But there are definitely some ways you can improve the quality of your interview lighting without even needing to use lights, just having some fundamentals down. And that's why I wanted to go over this with this documentary that I made called Finding Their Own Dance, Reawakening the Alaskan Alutiiq Arts. This is a documentary about the Alutiiq Alaska natives in the Kodiak region of Alaska. And for this film, I didn't have a light kit, I don't think ever, because it involved a lot of traveling on very small planes to small villages around Alaska where a light kit just wasn't practical. In retrospect, would have been awesome if I brought even just one light with a tripod, and a nice soft light would have helped me out in a couple places, which I will be showing you. But a fair amount of the time I was able to get pretty decent lighting by just checking out the location I was in and making the best of what I had. And so that's kind of what I want to show you today, is how you can do that. So we're just going to scroll through this thing, and whenever we come across an interview, sit-down interview, I'll talk about how I did it and what was going on with it. So let's just happen to go through here and see what ones pop up. Of course, they're going to be popping up multiple times here. So this is not interview. Here's an interview, if I can get that one to go. And so this is at the the Anchorage. It's like the Native Museum there. I forget what that's called. But this one we're shooting outside, no lights, obviously. So what you want to do in a situation like this, where you're filming outside, and particularly on a sunny day, is you want to get them in the shadows, because one of the worst types of light that you can film people in is direct sunlight, especially overhead sunlight. If you have to film someone in sunlight, the best way to do it is to put their back to it, so that the sun creates like a basically a backlight for them, creates a little rim of light around them. And then you can use if you have it, like a white bounce card or something, to bounce light back in on their face so it's not too dark. But that's not ideal. It's generally, I try and put, if I have to film people outside on a sunny day, I find a spot in the shade. And if you watch movies and TV shows, you'll notice a lot of times when people are outdoors and it's a sunny day, they are in the shade. They are not in direct light, because it creates this incredibly bright contrast between the light part of the person and the dark part. It's typically a bad angle. Maybe sunrise, sunset is okay, but anything else in between the sun's going to be high. It's going to create ugly shadows. It's a bad deal. So if you have to film outside, film in the shade somewhere. And so I picked this spot, and you can see we got kind of a nice soft light on them. It's not too bad. We can play a little bit here. I know this clip happens to go for a while. It's actually pretty decent 3-point lighting on him. We got, and I'm trying to make it more interesting by moving the shot around, but we got, what we'd call like a key light here. There's just natural light bouncing around, filling in the other side. And so that's the deal there. This just worked out well, that there was a bench and also some distance behind them to create a little feeling of depth there. But the key thing is, if you have to film outside, film in the shade. And if you can get, the brighter side of the light on one side of the face or the other, that's great. But I'm also looking for to reduce the contrast ratio here as much as possible. That means the difference between the brightest part of the shot and the darkest part of the shot. You don't want that to be a huge range. It's a little bit hot here. You can see this area is a little bit overexposed, but the darks still look good. And so that's what we're looking for. No light kit here, but the light, looks good there. So I'll call that one a win. Film in the shade being one of the main takeaways from that. So let's see here if we can scroll to it. I think we have another shot of him in his workspace. Let's see if we can cut ahead to that real quick without going too far. Sorry, DVD. Oh, we'll come back to him here, I think. DVD track, fast forward and rewinding is really tough. Okay, so here we are in his workshop. This is just a overhead light, and again, you got it's okay. It's like one overhead light here, and then with these light kind of cream walls, that bounces a lot of light around, so you get the shadows filled in there pretty nicely. You can see kind of a high contrast ratio for this camera anyway. This part's kind of blown out, but the key is that his face looks exposed properly. That's the main thing we're worrying about with lighting, because this is what people are looking at, the eyes and the face. Does that look good? That is your top priority. If anything else looks bad, tough. See if you can change it. I just had to take my lumps that this was kind of blown out, but I was not going to change the exposure on the shot at the expense of his face, because this is where people are looking. That's what's most important. So it's not great. You can see it's kind of from up above, so the shadows are not super awesome, but it's definitely not terrible. And this was a pretty good camera for its time. This was quite a while ago, so you can see it's even 4x3, so that's not great. But this camera could do a pretty nice job of contrast ratio and getting a shallower depth of field, even in a fairly tight spot like this. But here again, we got the light kind of off to the side and creating a brighter on one side of the face than the other side. Here's another one. This is one of the, the bane of my existence is fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lights almost never look good. In fact, I should have an example here for you in a minute of fluorescent lights that just really look terrible. But this one worked out okay. Let's see if I can skip ahead a little bit. Okay, so we've got some fluorescent lights, but there's enough white stuff on the walls and enough light bouncing around that the shadows aren't too bad on his face. Everything's pretty soft, so this works out okay, and it's not really that noticeable. I mean, if there's one thing you're looking for when working with natural lighting, is let's just have it not be so bad that it's distracting. And so this one was okay for that. It's the light's bouncing around enough that it's filling in shadows. He doesn't have ugly raccoon eyes or anything like that. So there's this. The priority here was more, I liked this arrangement of these shells kind of converging in the background, and so that was more important than necessarily worrying about getting the lighting just perfect on him with this. And you can see it works out okay. Pretty soft shadows. The light is pretty much from above. You can see it creates this sort of neck shadow here, but we don't have any terrible raccoon eyes or anything like that. So that's pretty good for overhead, if I recall correctly, fluorescent lighting. Let's see. Okay, that's terrible. Let's scan ahead here a little bit and see if we can talk about the next one. So this one was terrible. This is terrible lighting. And so the problem here is that this was just a quick grab interview that we were trying to interview this woman while we had access to her at what was a convention. And so we had to use just this ugly, way overhead lighting that they had. And so the colors are unattractive. You can see there's like a mix of sort of greenish light here and a more natural light here, which I might have had a light kit for this, but I really doubt it. I'm not sure what this light is here. But this is demonstrating a major issue with color, with white balance and color balance. So the overhead lights are this uglyish kind of green color, and then this does look like one of my light kits. So I was trying to make up for it with a light kit. This is a while ago. I don't 100% remember, but it looks like I've got an artificial light coming this way on her, but then it's mixing with this different color light. So the artificial light is going to be kind of a warm color, sort of yellowish, reddish color, and so this is kind of green. And when you have two types of light of different colors mixing, there's no way to get them to both look good. You can get one to look good and the other one terrible, or the other one to look good and well, it's the same thing. But you can't get them both to look right. So in this case, it looks like I favored the artificial light a little bit at the expense of this overhead light, making it look green. So this is not pleasant at all. This is definitely pretty cringy, but for most folks at home, they're not really going to notice. You know, folks like you and me are going to look at this and go, ugh, look at the color there. That's terrible. But it works okay. And again, content trumps production value, in my opinion. As long as the production value is good enough that you can hear people okay, see them okay, then it's fine. So let's scan forward here, see if we can come up across anybody else. So there's another terrible one. I'm sorry, scanning through this is really brutal. And so that's just in his office. And so that's fluorescent lights. That's pretty unattractive. If we can get it to quick. Let's see if I can sneak up on that one here. And so that's just kind of, again, a quick grab interview. I love the fact that his daughter was asleep in his arms. That was more important to me than having great lighting, was having this very authentic moment, and also kind of just a neat image of him in his office, sort of seeing where he works. But lighting-wise, pretty brutal. Overhead lighting, his hat is blocking most of the light, so that's not great. There's like, lighting-wise, there is nothing nice about this. This is just regular, ambient lighting, and so it's not awesome. But we can still hear him, we can see him okay, and the sleeping baby makes it all worth it. I always work in babies and animals as much as possible. So let's see here. I think after this title, we've got another interview that was done at a coffee shop in Anchorage. That was a great example of, making the best of what what you have access to. You need to do an interview with somebody, and you have no space. So here we are in Anchorage. Like, we don't have like a hotel room rented, which is a way that a lot of documentary films work. That's why you notice a fair amount of interviews just look like they're in a hotel room. It's because they're in a hotel room. That's a documentary filmmaker can come into a town and then set up in their hotel room. You can assume it's going to be fairly quiet and just film in there, but we didn't have that. So we were trying to figure out a location and knew this coffee shop downtown Anchorage, and I'm pretty happy with this because it was a fairly overcast day, and so the light is coming in through the windows, and that's going to be my key light, and then the fill light here is light bouncing off the walls, and you can see the walls are kind of a little bit of a warmer cream color, yellowish cream. And so it's going to add a tint of gold here, but I'm okay with that. Looks kind of cool. And then this was a compromise between trying to get lighting on her that looked decent, but also getting some distance between her and the background and having an interesting looking background. So when you are working without a light kit and without a lot of control over the place where you're recording, you're going to have to make compromises, and I would have preferred to have her looking this direction, but because this is like a little walkway here, we couldn't really quite do that as well. So I like to have the key light. I like to have my subjects looking toward the key light. She's looking away from the key light, so I would have rather had her on this side looking this way. It's just more attractive to me, and the reason I like that is it puts the side with the shadows, makes that more prominent. And shadows are where we see, texture, and basically it's through shadows that we can tell how a surface is shaped. So I like to have them looking toward the key light, but that was a compromise here that was, in my mind, totally worth it. We get some nice depth to the background here, so that's a little bit out of focus, and a nice soft light. So I've had a lot of luck with putting people by windows, but not if the sun is shining directly through. If it's bouncing, if it's overcast, or the light is not coming directly through, then you can get a nice soft light out of window like that. So windows, putting people next to windows is a great way to go. Let's kind of cruise through here and see if this is brutal. That's just terrible. So I was trying to film her with the cool mountains in the background. You know, over on the right side wasn't that interesting, but this was just terrible. So you can see the downside of filming someone outside on a bright sunny day. You got like way too much light here. It's a pretty bad angle. Not much light on this side. Pretty uneven lighting on her. And so I was really compromising the lighting for having an interesting background. It's also kind of nice when people are moving in general, because it's motion. We're in the motion picture business, so having a shot that moves is important and more interesting, but this came at a major cost to lighting, and I think my white balance was a little bit off. This shot I just find brutal in many ways, but you can still hear her, and technically I've got some glitches. In a minute here I think you'll see some lens flare as the sun starts to hit the lens. That'll show off any junk. If you have a dirty lens, that will all come up on there. And then I'm struggling here. You can see this is the part I remember hating the most. She's becoming underexposed, so I'm trying to open the iris to expose for her, and it blows out the background. This is that contrast ratio thing I was talking about. Way too high. The brightest part of the shot is way brighter than the darkest part of the shot, and a lot of cameras can't handle that big of a range like our eyes can. Our eyes could totally see detail here and here, but not cameras. So you have to pick which one you want to look at. And in this case, I wanted to look at her face, but that meant that everything that was too bright was just going to be blown out. So this shot was always thought of as like a disaster. Can't win them all. Make some mistakes. This is fluorescent lighting. Pretty boring. At least it's not, you know, distractingly ugly. The background is just a boring wall. Fortunately, she's wearing Alaska Native regalia, so that's interesting. But nothing too exciting about that. That was fine. Let's see if we got any others here that I can land on quickly and point out to you. This was certainly interesting when you talk about lighting, trying to decide between. That was basically that same location as before, where you've got a really bright background and a dark subject. You got to pick. Are you going to have the background blown out but be able to see the subject, or are you going to have the subject way too dark and then be able to see the background nicely? This is one I am pretty happy with. So this is a great solution for, let's see if I can get a better picture here, for filming outside, is find some shade to film in. And it happened to be this kind of cool old building with some moss growing on it. I put her in the shade of that. You can see a little bit of mountain there. It's got a neat texture, but it's not too distracting. The lighting on her is just kind of soft and not a lot of, it's pretty diffused shadows, so you're not going to really see any of that, but it's not blown out, and it just looks fine. Might have been nicer to have her a little further away from the background. I don't remember the details of how much we could move before she was in the sun, but otherwise, I mean, this looks way better than if I had taken her into the sun and tried to film her. Her hair would have been blown out, super bright. Shadows would have been ugly. So this is a great way to get good outside lighting when you have no lighting control at all, when you just have to hustle with what you got. If you can put them in the shade by an interesting building, that's great. This is a tough one too. This is we weren't even planning on shooting interviews. I just happened to bring a camera when we did these. This was after the film had already been screened once, and one of the comments that we got after we screened it in Kodiak was, well, you don't have enough elders. And we were like, well, we didn't have a lot of luck reaching out to elders. So the people there said, well, we'll help you. Since we had shown we were dedicated to making this film, we basically finished it. We're just looking for their feedback. We kind of proved that we really wanted to do this thing. So they helped us get elders. So I had no lighting for this. This is just in front of a window at the Kodiak Alutiiq Museum in there, kind of up in an upstairs sort of conference room type area. So this is pretty bad. We got blown out background, lighting from behind, but the other options were just so boring. It was all conference room type stuff. So here I'm sort of compromising the blown out background for a really boring background. And so it's not ideal, but outside light tends to look kind of nice when it is soft. It's got good color to it. So a little bit blown out, not ideal, definitely not what I would generally recommend. But as I said, desperate times lead to desperate measures. And so there are more interviews like that. Let's see if I can grab this one. This is one I remember really hating. Fluorescent lights, again in the Alutiiq Museum, but they're overhead, so you get this shadow under her nose. And the problem with fluorescent lights is no matter where you put them in the room, the brightest one is overhead. So I hate fluorescent lights, and I often think about this specific interview. This is one I really wanted to show you, where it would have been awesome if I just had one light. I could have used that, maybe bounced it off a white wall or something, and had a nice light at about a 45-degree angle instead of this overhead stuff. Is it like unwatchable? No, it's just kind of irritating to me, and one of the reasons why fluorescent lights are just the worst. One of the things you can do, if you really want to get serious about it, is you can see if you can turn off some of the fluorescent lights and not the others. This, by the way, is a New Year's celebration in Nanwalek. They have a very interesting way of celebrating the old year and the new, kind of exchanging hands there. So you can, turn off some of the fluorescent lights. Another thing you could do is, if you want to get fancy, you can climb up on a chair or something if it's safe and just twist some of the fluorescents to turn them off. That's one way that you might be able to work. Here's fluorescence again. Just not looking great, but looks okay. Also, fortunately, we're talking about New Year's, so it's okay to have a Christmas tree back there, but if that wasn't the subject, that would be a little awkward. Like, why is there a Christmas tree would be a little bit distracting, but it's relevant to what they're talking about. So, yeah, not awesome, not terrible, struggling a little bit with what looks like reflection from the outside window. I think what I was doing here, I was more interested in the background might have been taking a little bit of precedence over lighting here, but it also could have been that the lighting by the window was too bright, too direct. But at least it's not blocking his eyes too much. That's one of the things you definitely got to keep an eye out for, is if you have lights reflecting in the glasses, at least make sure they don't shine over the person's eyes, because that's what people are going to be looking at. And so sometimes you'll have to sacrifice your lighting just to make sure that it's not shining directly into their eyes. This is one where we just dropped into this guy's house. You can tell, once you get familiar with documentary filmmaking, that this is kind of a bluer outside light compared to this more yellow inside light. So my guess is we got some windows that are shining on his face. We're going for a little bit of trying to find, some interesting background here, which can be tough when you just drop into someone's house. Most people's houses aren't set up to be nice TV studios. But we got good key light, fill light, it's pretty nice. And that's just outside light coming from here with some inside light. And so we are going to I did have to decide, what do I want to look right? Do I want the outside light to look white and the inside to look a little bit yellow, or I could have this look more white, but then this would look kind of blue. And if you don't understand why, then you need to review white balance and degrees Kelvin and all that sort of stuff. But so I'm not going to get into that right now. But my rule generally is warmer lights are more attractive. So I'm going to white balance for my outside light so it looks pretty normal, pretty close to normal. So that the inside light might look a little bit warm. That's okay. Otherwise, what you end up with is if the inside light looks right, then this looks really blue and it's cold and unattractive and can look kind of like, nighttime, since that's how films tend to light scenes they want to look like nighttime, is with blue lights to look like the moon or something. All right, let's see if there's any other ones here that I want to highlight that I missed. That one was shot that we just whipped by. I don't know if I can find it again. In a hotel lobby, fluorescent lights, brutal. No fun at all. Again, just kind of doing the best you can with what you have. So at least I'm kind of, well, actually this wasn't fluorescence. It looks like they have a few lights, and I'm putting them off to the side because I want those lights as much as possible to sort of come down at a 45-degree angle and favor one side of the face over the others. So I wouldn't want to put them right under those lights. You get even more of the raccoon eyes. You want lights coming in at an angle, and you want a difference. One side of the face brighter than the other side. That's sort of the fundamentals of three-point lighting. So that's basically what we're doing here to the best of my ability, but not a particularly attractive location, not particularly attractive lighting, but at least it's not distracting. I don't think anyone would look at this and go, oh, I couldn't pay attention to what he was saying because the lighting was so bad. It's okay. Doing the best I can, again, knowing that what I'm trying to strive for, basic three-point lighting, a lighter side of the face, it can be either side, but generally, like for this one, as I said before, he's sort of talking this direction, so I would have preferred this be the brighter side. I like them to be looking toward the brighter side, I guess you could say, in lighting, but in this case, it's not a major deal breaker for me. So had this side be what we'd call the key light side, this is the fill light, maybe a little bit of what we call backlight from other lights in the room. But just doing the best I can with what I got. And that's definitely not like lighting I'm incredibly proud of. It's just lighting meant to not be too distracting. Let's see if I can get her to play at all. Whoops, that was a mistake. Let's see if we can find that again. Okay, there's Old Harbor. Whoops, sorry about that. Somehow jumped ahead in a chapter. This is pretty brutal. So here, what I'm compromising for is lighting for background. And that's kind of the perennial dance you have to do when you don't have a light kit, is what's more important to me, the lighting being perfect or the background being interesting. If I could have had better lighting on him but kind of just a boring tree background, or I could compromise and have not amazing lighting on him but a pretty cool background of Anchorage there. So I compromised and said, okay, the lighting is not going to be as amazing, but at least I'll have kind of a cool background. And so that's what we have here. Normally, as I said, if you're filming outside, put them in the shadows. There wasn't a place to put them in the shadows for this particular spot. This is a spot I was just dropped into sight unseen. If I had scouted out or had some time to pick better locations, but this is just like, here's where we're shooting, Rob, so do the best you can. So this is not ideal. It would be better if I couldn't put him in the shadows to at least have the light behind him, so then it's shining more on his shoulders and not creating these harsh shadows on his face. You can see we got a pretty big contrast ratio right on his face between the dark parts of his eyes and the lighter part of his cheeks. But this was, again, a good camera. It can handle a pretty broad range of bright and dark, and still show detail. On a cheaper camera, this would be blown out and this would be way too dark, and there'd be no way around it. It would be a disaster. So that's where a good expensive camera really shows its worth, is when it comes to these tough situations of major contrast. So there's a few more in here that we didn't have a chance to look at. Let's see if I can. Yeah, I wanted to show you a little bit of her, if I can make it work without skipping by everything. Here we go. Okay, so this is kind of a twofer here. You get to see the lighting that I came up with for her, but also this is another recommendation I have for folks. Is it's cool if you can have your subjects doing something if it's relevant and not sort of extraneous to whatever your documentary subject is, but it adds some motion, adds some interest, and it can also kind of relax them and get them speaking more naturally. One of the tricks in the world of fiction filmmaking I've heard is have your actors doing something while they're acting, because the brain, kind of distract the brain from their lines, and you can get more natural performance out of them. But this woman was not thrilled to be on camera, not thrilled to be interviewed at first. By the end of the interview, we were all great buds and everything, which is often the case. But she wasn't that excited about it. But also she was talking about beading. That's what she does, is bead these headdresses. And so I thought, hey, this is cool. Let's get her working. That'll kind of keep her mind occupied on what she's doing and not worrying so much about the camera. And for lighting, it's not amazing, but it's fine. We got outside lighting coming from here, and then this lamp from the inside. And you can see looks like I favored the outside light because this is a little bit warm. You see on her hand there that's kind of yellow. So I'm basically setting up the camera so that this outside light is going to look pretty normal. Whites are going to look white in there. So the inside light is going to make whites look kind of yellow, which again is the way I like to go. If you have to choose, set it up for the outside light, let the inside light look a little bit warm. And so, this is not really a wonderful example of three-point lighting, but it's worth it, and it works okay. It's not distracting. Again, no one's going to say I couldn't follow it because the lighting was so bad. You can see her face. You can see what she's doing. So, it works. But it is a compromise. And if I had my own light kit, I could have maybe closed off that window, put another light on this side, and lit her that way. But honestly, I'm kind of a fan of natural lighting, and as long as it's not fluorescents are the worst. So there's, as you can see as we jump through, there's a few others. Swen in his workshop here, not fantastic. Lighting's kind of weird behind him, so you get high contrast. We got a lot of bright here but dark here, and the camera can't handle that much, and so this looks like a little too dark and this looks a little too light, but at least on this eye it's okay. But for me, it's in documentary, it's just not, it's not the end of the world. It looks natural, it's kind of authentic lighting, and so it doesn't, I would say, distract. Again, no one's going to look at this and go, I couldn't understand or pay attention to what he was doing because the lighting was so bad. So there's some tips based on my real world experience with going, being dropped into a situation and then just having to do the best that I can. And so besides the tips I just gave you about how to make the most of existing lighting, the thing that will help you out the best is having the best possible camera you can afford, because an awesome camera can shoot really gorgeous images even in pretty terrible lighting, and vice versa. A cheap camera is going to record some really terrible looking stuff even when the lighting is pretty good.